Chapter 6 Toby and the Promise. I walk to the front of my school wearing a nice white suit and pants. I hold the container for the golden liquid in my pocket. I walked into the building and saw Rebecca standing and chatting with Bob and George at the tables that they placed in the middle of the school. I walked over towards her and I heard her giggle and laugh with the other two. My heart is telling me that she is doing this out of spite, but in my gut I thought they were talking about how pathetic I was. I walked up to the group and they all immediately stopped talking. I looked at Rebecca and nervously scratched the back of my head. With a shaky voice I asked, "Rebecca, do you think that I could have a moment of your time?" She looks at the others and then coldly at me. I think that she is about to tell the other two here to beat me up or something. She says, "Guys, please hold here for a second. I have to talk to this pleb." Bob and George stare at me as me and Rebecca walk outside and sit down at the tiny blue tables that the school set it up for visitors. "What do you want, Toby?" I place my hands on the table and calmly state, "I know where I messed up and you're right. And I just now noticed, thanks to my mom and dad, that I was better when I didn't have powers. And I now noticed that I liked having you as my number one friend. Can you please forgive me and be my friend again?" Her face had the expression of shock and began to blush. She states, "Well, I think that would be best. But on the condition that you don't use your powers for a complete week." I gladly put up a smile and say, "I would love that condition." We stood up and she walked beside me as we walked into the school. Bob and George stood at the table in the back and stared at me with a nasty glare. I whisper into Rebecca's ear, "What if they start problems?" She looks at me and pulls my black tie towards her. She brought my face nearly inches away from hers as she stared at me with a serious straight face. She states, "If you use your powers once, then we're done being friends." She lets go of my tie and we walk past the commons area and into our class. Hours go by with our classes being like they were normal. No one caused me trouble and the chatter about me was dying. It started to get to me, but as long as Rebecca here is spying over my shoulder, I can't make a big deal over all the chit-chat about me. It struck deep into my heart knowing that I could take out most of this school, and in my pocket I hold the key to destroy this entire school and most of the police force. He came up and as I walked into the locker room, Randall walked up behind me and turned me around. The power from him that rushed through me made my skin crawl and my nails begin to feel cold. Randall states, "So the whole school is talking about your ass beating and then how you were power locked by Rebecca. So I wanted to cut a deal with you." I looked around the locker room and saw only a couple of guys around. I quietly asked, "What do you want, Randall?" Randall chuckles to himself before he states, "Well, you see, I know you joined a certain gang. And within your pocket you hold a certain liquid that could make someone like me a god. Now I don't want that. But what I do want is to help you, my friend. And you and me, Toby, go back as far as I can remember. See, I know that George and Bob are causing you problems and I want to be the one to push them back until you're out of this whole deal between you and Rebecca. Plus I can spread the rumor around that anyone who spreads their whole shit talking around school will personally get beaten down to a bloody pulp. All in exchange for one thing. I want to see your help in taking on the top chef." His face is holding up that big grin of his as he stares at me with a serious aura emanating from him. I state, "You'll do all of this and keep Rebecca out of the loop for my aid against the top chef. So what's your game in all this, Randall?" He calmly whispers, "I want to be a king of all kings. And with my type of power I think we are destined to be the generation to topple all of history. Especially since you're looking at the one and only person to ever eat the very chef that gave us all our powers in the first place." My organs shook in their place as the pressure in the room felt like a whole field of boulders coming down on me all at one spot. But since people are still getting powers, I assume that I only ate one of his avatars. But you, Toby, are a mystery to me. Why would he put the best power as an inedible object? This leads me to believe that the more that time goes on, the more adventures and dangerous the item we eat will allow for more stronger beings. So if we don't take the chance to take down the top chef and write the history books, then more people will be like you and I, sir. Are you in for the deal?" He leans in as I put on my black shorts and white tank top. I put out my hand to shake his. My nervousness slowly rises as he puts his hand in his pocket. "I don't think we need to touch each other to make a deal. Just say that you'll help and I will keep up my end of the deal. He must know that if we make physical contact I will have a touch of his power." I say, Deal, and just like that he turns around and walks out of the locker room. I followed just a few seconds behind him, but as I opened the door to the hallway of the school, he seemed to have disappeared. I walked into the gymnasium and Greg stands there with his clipboard and turns his head to look at me. He smiles widely as he walks towards me. I raise my hand and wave it as I cheerfully say, "Hello. Sorry sir, but today I can't use my power. It would be amazing if I could just do a normal class." Greg looks at me and his smile disappears. He states, "Well Toby, I guess today is your luck because no one is going to be using their powers today because all of you will be learning a martial art." "Well, at least as much as I know how to teach you." Interested, I say. "Good. Can't wait to see what everyone here has got." Then as I walked past Greg, I saw the other students begin to walk in. Greg makes me line up with the other students and Rebecca stands next to me. Greg addresses the students and goes into the study plan. I sadly leave Rebecca's side and stand in front of George. I wanted to run back to the boys' locker room and grab the power enhancer and solve this problem, but Greg said we can't use our powers, and as long as Rebecca is in the same room with me, I can't just go spamming away with powers. Greg tells everyone to begin the sparring to asset where everyone is with martial arts. I don't know a single thing about martial arts. But George does, so I raise my fist up in the air and spread them apart. I saw it once in an old Blackie Pan movie. George jumps and strikes out with his foot. I duck and strike out with my fist. George brought his foot down and deflected my fist. Taking his power into my body, I got a rush of adrenaline. I stood up and struck out with my fist, getting closer to him. He just swayed like a snake, dodging my punches. Then I swing my leg like he did at him. As my foot begins to fly by his face, a blade of just 2 inches protrudes out of my heel and slices cleanly through George's face before receding. As I place my foot down on the ground, George looks around and smiles as Greg is busy with a couple other students. Rebecca looks over at me and smiles. I am glad to know she didn't see my move. George strikes out with his fist and I make sure to lean away from his fist. I am glad to see a blade emerge from his skin and it comes close to my eye but misses. I strike out with my fist and as it grazes his nose, I make tiny unnoticeable blades that blend in with my hair on my arm. His nose was grated. He looks at me and shouts in anger before huge blades come out of his arms. His shouting got the attention of Greg. He struck out with his fist and this time was much faster than my body was prepared to deal with. A blade struck my shoulder and the pain was so immense. I screamed in agony. He raised me into the air and I could feel the blade grind against my collarbone. Rebecca screams and brings all of everyone's attention to me. I looked down at George as he looked at me in rage. I swung my leg up and struck George in the jaw. He stumbled back as I was allowed to pull myself off of his blade. Greg stands in between us and shouts, "Both of you back off." I wanted to run through Greg and beat the crap out of George. But I turn around and walk towards Rebecca. She runs towards me in a panic. She grabs my arm to pull me into a hug and immediately pulls back her hand. It was covered in blood, and that is when the words "oh no" came across my mind over and over. The blades on my arms receded and I grab her wrist and worryingly ask, "How did you cut yourself, Rebecca?" She looks at her hand but back at me. She worryingly grabs my wrist and pulls me towards the nurse's office. She says nothing as we get to the nurse's office. As we get there, I sit down and she sits across from me, applying a few paper towels against the big hole that came to be my shoulder. I screamed in pain as she calmly stared at my shoulder. She pulls out a strand of hair and forms it into scissors. It was quite exciting to see the tiny thin strand of hair turn into a tiny ball of red goo and then morph into scissors. With those scissors she cuts off a massive portion of her hair that now brighted to the height of the bottom of her earlobe. She transforms the hair into bandages, ice, and painkillers. She begins to wrap up my wound. She wraps it tightly before applying ice to the area. She then hands me a cup of water and the painkillers. I swallow the cup of water along with the painkillers as I stare at her panicked face. With the pain medication hitting my really hard, I slurred my words as I asked, "Are you okay?" She sits next to me and with her head hung low she says, "I can't help but to feel awful for not allowing you to use your powers in that situation. If George would have swung at your head or strike through your heart, I don't know what I would have done." She began to cry and I did what came first in my mind. I threw my arm around her, even though it was the arm that she just bandaged up, and pulled her into my chest. She throws her arms around my torso and cries. Good thing Randall will set things straight before I get down to the grime of this whole thing between me and George.
Okay, that was chapter 6, Toby and the Icebreakers. Please like, subscribe, and comment down below. Have a good one.